Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Okay, it's my pleasure, everyone, to welcome Professor William Jones from the University of Washington to MSR. William has been a friend of Microsoft's ever since he left Microsoft. He used to be a program manager on search. I actually worked with him for a little while back when I was in the consumer division. William's been at University of Washington now for 10 years as a research professor, and for most of those 10 years he's been working on personal information management, culminating in the Planner prototype, which he's going to be showing you today. He's also done a bunch of field work, which unfortunately he hasn't analyzed completely yet, so maybe when he comes back he can talk to us about what he's finding in the field. With that, William, I'm going to let you just take it away.
Well, thank you. So, can you hear me? Am I actually being amplified now?
Is it turned on?
I can't tell, but it sounds like it. Well, thanks, Mary. So, what I wanted to do today is just go through a little bit of an. I'd like this to be semi-interactive, but I know that I commit a sin repeatedly, and that's try to say too much or too many slides. So, we'll see. But what I'd like to do is. I'd like to go to the next slide is what I'd like to do. Okay, there we go. First of all, I want to acknowledge National Science Foundation support under 2 different grants for some of the work that I'm talking about today. And so my objectives, though, are to provide a very, very, very brief update on the Keeping Found Things Found project overall, and then focus more on the Planner. And I'd love for you to try the Planner and give me feedback on it, but more important is the Planner is a way of having a dialogue, sort of grounding a dialogue about what it means to create informational places in your life, and what does that mean, and how can we do a better job of it, and the tools that we build. So this is the brief lightning review, and it's very selective. I'm focusing on a couple of studies that we've done over the years that point to the importance of place, and so. We've heard these stories over the years. Search is going to replace the need to file or to put things into folders. Tags are going to replace, similarly, are going to replace the need for these. But we consistently come up with findings that say that no, there's something in folders or folder-like things that is important. So we did a study several years ago, back when Google Docs, back when Google Desktop Search hadn't really come out yet, and it was a thought experiment. So it said, why do you have folders? Well, I have folders to get back to stuff, and so how do you get back to stuff on the internet? Well, I use search, and most people use Google search, and they said they really liked it. So we said, suppose you had something like Google search on the desktop. This is many years ago again, and they said that'd be great. I'd love that, and so then, can we take away your folders? Absolutely not. Are you nuts? So what that did was to give us, we sort of then could drill a little bit farther down. So you said that you had folders for finding stuff, but we're giving you another way to find stuff. So why do you still need folders? And they came up with all sorts of different reasons. Folders help me understand my information better. The act of putting stuff into folders helps me understand better. And the folders themselves, even if the titles are cryptic to other people, they mean something to me. And so this is the canonical example. This was wedding planning for a traditional Thai wedding. And you can see that the folders here are like a problem decomposition of sorts. You can see under here, there's wedding, and then there's honeymoon, there's hotel invitation cards, presentation, wedding presentation, Thai wedding ceremony, wedding dress trials. And so you get sort of this picture that it's not just a place to put stuff, it's also a place to organize your thoughts about what you need to do and how you need to do it. And we got comments to that effect when we threatened to take away their folders as a hypothetical. They would say, well, folders help me to understand what I need to do next. They remind me of what needs to be done. Okay, so that's one study among many. More recently, under a Google award, Andrea Sivan did some very nice work in our project on the Keeping Found Things Found project on tagging versus the use of folders. And we found a pretty nice situation with Hotmail versus Gmail. They're both fairly basic. The web interfaces are both fairly basic. But in one, so what they differ on chiefly is the model. In the case of Hotmail, the model is you're putting something into a folder, even if the folders can't really be hierarchically organized. So in the other case, you're tagging. You're putting labels on things. And we had people experience both conditions across different weeks on project information that was being sent to them, 5 articles per day on a project that they selected, like write a book or run a marathon. And what we found are some interesting results that weren't immediately obvious, I think, if you look at it ahead of time. Ahead of time, I think most people would say logically, if you can get more tags to something, then Hotmail in a sense is an impoverished version of Gmail, because if you want to, you can use the labels in Gmail as folders. You can start to say, okay, only one label per email. But what we found is that actually there's some gotchas with that. And one gotcha is that if you, it's nice to be able to label things as apples and oranges, but once you start doing that, you have to be consistent about it. So there's sort of a manual effort in saying, okay, it was great that I really couldn't decide, so I was going to put both apples and oranges on this one. But then you have to be consistent about it with everything that comes down the pike later. So there's some less obvious things like exhaustive search is easier to do if you have things in a partition established by the folders. I'm not going to go into this study, although it's available. I'd be happy to provide it to you. But beyond that, there was sort of a sense of, and it wasn't all in favor of labels or tags versus folders, but it was surprisingly even in terms of when people sort of compared what they liked and didn't like about the use of Hotmail. And again, we studied Hotmail versus Gmail, not to study the email interfaces per se, but just we asked people to sort of step back from that and sort of for the model of information management. We call one is put that there, put that in a folder, and the other is label this, sort of the sense of having a label gun. And so anyway, that's another example. Beyond, there were some things that, yeah.
Didn't you say that people stopped tagging after a while?
Well, that was another study. We've had several studies. Another study, we had people over a period of time, we tracked their accomplishment of a personal project. A lot of what we do is focused on projects and personal projects. And the project is personal not because it's just in your personal life versus your work life, but because it's not going to happen without you. So a personal project at work might be finish a report or justify your existence or whatever. That might be a project. What we found what we would do is go back and meet with people over a period of up to 12 weeks. And one of our participants at the beginning was wildly enthusiastic about tagging and the potential of tagging to organize all of his personal information. And then in the last interview, he said, "Yeah, I'm not sure. Tagging really wasn't what I was hoping it would be." So. Now, I'm not going to argue that tagging isn't wonderful and useful, and particularly on the web for the wisdom of crowds effect in social situations. But I'm going to be talking a lot about place today and why place still matters in a digital environment and what that means and how we can support it. Okay. So a motivation for this is this quote from the publisher of my book, Keeping Found Things Found, which, and here it is. There was a real sense of comfort and satisfaction back in the days when things were mostly paper-based. My secretary would prepare a folder, and everything I needed was close at hand. All the correspondence, previous drafts, reviewer comments, everything was right there. Okay. And more recently, we have this example from somebody in the audience, as a matter of fact, and it's an example of OneNote use. And so what's really nice about this is, and all of you probably who use OneNote can relate to this in some way or another. In this case, things are organized under section groups by project, like AWS or Office 14. And then within a project by people or standing meetings. And for a person, there are pages according to the meeting. So this is a paraphrase of what he told me. I was really surprised because I used to use search a lot to get back to notes I'd taken, but now I know just where to go. And so again, there's sort of a sense of, I picked up on a little bit of a sense of satisfaction. Not only did this work, but there was some reassurance in its use. So now there is a problem, of course, that not everything will necessarily fit into OneNote. Not everything is necessarily a note, although OneNote can handle a lot of different things these days. And then in the other case, not all of us have secretaries to help us organize things. So when we talk to people, we get quotes like this. My information never seems to be where I am. Or this quote, I confess that I don't use this feature of Outlook a lot, and when I ask myself, it's because of where I am when I go to a meeting. I am not naturally in the Outlook calendar at that point. So now in that case, they know how to get back to the Outlook calendar, of course, but it's extra clicks. And those extra clicks are just not something they want to take the trouble to do. Or they may not even be reminded of it in the midst of a meeting. The last quote, all I do all day long is go back and forth between programs. How many people, for how many people is this a problem? Do you relate to these examples? Okay. How many people, if anybody doesn't relate to one of these quotes, I'd like to talk to you afterwards. I mean, I'm serious about that because you probably have a system that I can learn from.
But I think it's different when you start using a phone. It's
when you start using what?
When you use your phone as the main conduit for a lot of this information, it doesn't feel anymore like you're switching a lot of context. On the PC, there is like a very clear demarcation between each program's interface.
Okay.
While, like, for example, even on a Windows mobile phone, or this one's a little bit more like a PC.
Uh-huh.
I do tend to feel like I switch context, but on a Windows mobile phone, where everything's kind of on the home screen, you don't switch as much. It just feels like I'm not switching between programs.
Okay.
It just feels like more natural.
So can you imagine, would that, do you think, can you imagine a day when you would give up your laptop or your desktop computer and just go with that? Maybe plugged into a UI?
I didn't even take on my laptop.
Okay.
So it's
Okay.
I was just curious
Interesting.
if you guys had that.
Okay.
Actually, I had a different question for you. When you did the labels study versus folders, did the interaction model contribute a lot to like how people felt? So in the folder, kind of it's a move to
Right.
folder model, while in the label, did they kind of drag and drop it on the label, or did they type a label on the side?
Well, if you use the web Hotmail interface, it's basically
the Hotmail interface I've used, the Gmail one.
There isn't really a drag and drop in that case. The action is just so really the only thing different between the two, beyond the greater flexibility of labels, is that they invoke a folder model where you're putting something somewhere. And one key difference, and this is more specific to inbox management, is that in that case it actually goes out of the inbox, and that was a complaint that people had in the Gmail case. It never goes out of the inbox.
That's the place problem.
Yeah. And for people that are using the inbox as task management, that's a problem.
Is that a problem? Using the inbox in Gmail as a task? I mean,
Well, the problem there is that for people that want to know, there are some people that want to. If something is in the inbox, I think it's fewer people every year, but the inbox represents things to do.
Right.
And so in the case where you're labeling, basically, I think now Gmail has a sort of a filter which is basically to show me things that aren't tagged. But so you're sort of filtering by the absence of tags, whereas in the case of Hotmail, you're putting it in a folder. It means that it's not in the inbox anymore. It means that you've done something with it.
Yeah.
Okay? Does that make sense?
When you archive a message in Gmail, is that not an indication that you've...
Yeah, you can archive. Yeah. So that's a special kind of folder. Yeah. Right. I thought this was a good quote by Licklider. 85% of my time was spent getting into a position to make a decision. So clerical feasibility, not intellectual capability, determined a lot of things. So this is... I study personal information management, and you can talk about a space of personal information that's very large. And you can do that by thinking about the different ways in which you relate to information. So there's information as owned by me, or information about me, which is not necessarily owned by me. So there's all sorts of information out there about our credit scores. There's all sorts of information that companies are keeping about us, or organizations that they know about us or think they know about us, that is not necessarily under our control. This is becoming a big issue in the medical arena, because there's a question about whether people should be able to access their information online and should also be able to correct that information. And then there's the information that's directed towards us, which gets very personal at the dinner hour, if somebody calls you on the phone. I think another example of that now is the flash animations that dance across a web page. And that's another kind of information directed at you, which you cannot possibly screen out. We are wired to attend to movement. So I've noticed a lot of those on Hotmail, by the way, just as a comment. Then there's information sent by us, and or the information that I'm sending out to you now. Am I getting my points across? Am I creating the impression I hope to create? Same thing with email. Is it reaching the people we want it to reach? Are people really reading it? Are we really understanding what we're doing? There's an example. I have the example from when I was here at Microsoft back in the 90s that we had, the as appropriate, and they still have that expression. And it's funny how those things don't change. We had people through the day, of course, exchanging email about this job candidate. And one of the program managers went up to look at his website. It was quite rare back then that a candidate would have a website. This was like 1997, I think, or 1996. And he did have a website, but he provided enough information on that website for this one person to be convinced that his solution that he'd been talking about through the whole day would not work at all. It was really poorly conceived. And so that was an example where the information he provided out there was actually hurting him. And then there's all the information we've experienced in our whole life. And so how do we get access to that again? Or how do we use our experiences to get access to other information? And so my life bits, of course, is an example of that. And then there's I deliberately call this the sixth sense. It's the sixth sense of information, personal information, is in things that are potentially relevant to us, things that we might like to see, or things that we really don't want to see. There's stuff out on the internet we really don't want to see. Okay, so that's another sense. So this is a graphical rendition, and I think it's kind of new. Somebody that did the illustrations for the book came up with it. She did a really nice job. So information beamed to us, information we send out. Here's the stuff that's on our hard drive and in our file cabinets at home and in our flash memory on our digital camera. Here's our experience of the world. And here's the information that's kept about us out there, and there's 6 is everything. It's kind of a nice little graphical way to look at it. I thought this was kind of but what does it mean to be personal? So I thought this was interesting. This is from Henderson and Carr talking about rooms. This is a personal place of information back 1987. Here's something from our study more recently. Well, there's some differences there. And now there's a computer there. The paper is still around. So that's a part of the place. And so how can we create these places? And I think that there's been discussion about place versus space, and Durish and others, as a noun. I think it's also useful to talk about it as a verb. Okay? And so place is a verb, as in put something somewhere. That's important. It's an interaction. If I put this here, then I have some memory of having done that. That's an experience. I think it's also interesting to think of that in the sense of establishing associations. I can't quite place you. I've seen you before. Where did I see you? That's another sense of place. And what do we have as a verb for space? Well, the verb that I hear most often is, oh, I really spaced that out. Sorry about that. I don't know. There may be others. But so interesting wordplay. Why place? Place for a sense of control. In our studies, we see people talking about the importance of place as a place they can put stuff. And so even in work situations where people are, for example, using SharePoint, we find that they have their own personal place that they're putting stuff. Why do they want it there? Well, because it's under their control. One participant had the experience that she had a document out on a share, and it disappeared. And she lost a couple of days of work and couldn't get back to it again. Or because she's not ready for other people to look at it. And so she wants it here, where she can work on it. There's also an enduring effect of browsing as a way to get back to information. Jamie Tevan here did some really nice work when she was at MIT on the importance of browsing or orienteering to get back to things. And that effect still endures. When it first came out, when it was reported earlier on by Burrow and Nardi, there was the thought that, well, search, there was a little bit of an exchange, a follow-on, mini papers to the paper. And they found that, if you're familiar with that location-based, they called it location-based finding, I think, or filing, as a way to get back to things. They found that on the desktop, people preferred to sort of noodle back to their things, going through folders and subfolders. And the argument back then, when was that first published? Do you remember? It's the early 90s, I think. The argument back then was, well, search is on the desktop is pretty basic. It's going to get better. But more recently, Bergman, just last year or the year before, in ACM TUIS, he and some other people, including Steve Whitaker, show that no, for things that are under your control or things that sort of are things that you are working on, for files, you still prefer browsing as a way to get back to things. Now, we've also have some unpublished results to say that, yes, that's true for the first choice people have for getting back to documents is browsing through folders and subfolders. And search is not a very common choice. In Bergman's study, it was like maybe 15% of the times was that the first choice. We find that for browsing, or for documents, we also looked at web pages and email. And we find that for email, one of the most popular choices is search to get back to information. Search and browsing, as in sort of just scrolling. And for web pages, what would you guess are the most? There's three things that are sort of more or less equally popular for getting back to things. What would you guess? Search, definitely up there. Two others.
Favorites.
No. Oh, well, favorites, we get different effects on that. In one study, we got that people just don't use it anymore. In another study, it's still enduring.
Just type in the email.
Yeah, autocomplete. Autocomplete is very popular as a way to get back to things. And the other thing is just basically to go, it's a variation on browsing, essentially, to go to, I don't know where that is, but I know I can get to it from this website. So you go to that website and then hyperlink back to it.
So is that a variation right there, like between just search versus using a URL or a previously known website? Is that the equivalent of a place on a web? Is it actually?
Yeah, I think so. I think that counts. It counts. I know how to get here. And then from here, I know how to get to this other place. Yeah, yeah, I think so. And that actually gets to an interesting thing. I think that one of the things when we talk about space and place in a digital context, we sort of hang ourselves by being too literal about what that means. So it doesn't have to be something like you get from the media labs at MIT or from Second Life. So I think one sense of place or space is a sense of direction. I know how to get back to this. I know how to get to this document by, if I go back to a Word document, I click on the recent, the most recently opened, I know I can get back to it again. That's a sense of, I think, a sense of direction in a digital place. So, pardon me?
You think that's actually a very primal thing that you are tuned to?
I'm arguing it is, but I don't, I'm not sure that where the evidence is. I'm just going to argue with that, and we can discuss it and see. And how would we go about establishing that? That's an important thing.
Commonality between the kinds of things people browsed for and the kinds of things people searched for, in terms of just their content, because the documents you tend to browse for them.
Not that I know of. Now, what I think are some of the differences have to do with. Well, I think it matters. The interesting thing about documents is you have to have placed them in the first place, for the most part. We sort of establish this document, I'm going to create this document, it's going to go in this folder, or it's going to go on my desktop. That's still a sense of place. Whereas email, it just sort of flows in. You don't have any direct control over that. And whereas you do have, well, these nice tidy events. You have, oh, I remember I looked at that yesterday, or I remember it was most likely from so-and-so. So yeah. So I think probably one of the key things is familiarity and whether you've actually placed it initially. Integration is another reason for place, to have everything close at hand. That gets back to that one quote from the publisher. I think related to that is a sense of context and connection. And some of these things are taken from Jamie Teven and the perfect search engine is not enough. So I like this. When 42 is not enough, as the answer, that comes from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. What's the answer to life? And sort of more generally, it's sort of a sense of making sense of things. You can't understand what this means in isolation a lot of times. Reminding and serendipity. So it's not just the destination, it's the journey along the way. Now, that doesn't preclude search, because search can also bring up things that you didn't know about. And, oh, I didn't know about that. That wasn't what I was looking for, but that's interesting. That's a match. Implicit tagging is another one that I think with place. If you go to a place, you can tag with respect to the things that are nearby. So there's sort of a... And then time tracking, reporting, and journaling. Those are all things that could be freebies if we had a sense of place as something that people consistently come back to. Okay? Very powerful. I mean, these are very powerful features, but we don't know how to do it, I think is part of the problem. How do we do that? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the planner today. And I think one thing that we need is to support the sense of navigation, so back and forward and up and down. And I love this quote from The Waking by Theodore Recchi. I learn by going where I have to go. So that's sort of ambiguous. I learn by going where I have to go. Sort of like you learn as you're going. Placing options. So I think 3 operations are very important. Ordering, grouping, and the ability to annotate. Very important to a sense of place. And there's sort of a little quip in here, sort of riffing off of if they build it, if you build it, they will come. If you build it, will you come back to it again? So that's a question. And the answer is a lot of times no. If you think about all the notes you take down on a piece of paper that you never come back to again, you don't even look at it again. We have quotes about that from our fieldwork side that sort of a lot of people would say, I find that I don't even come back to the note about half of the time. And I would argue about half of the value in taking the note is in just the act of taking it, okay? And so whether or not you refer to it again, because it forces you to articulate what it is that you're going to do. And then that's also, that, again, is that action is something that is in your mind as well. So I think persistence is important. I go again and again and again to search. Maybe I'm not doing things right, but I go to search on Vista, and I add the folders column, and the next time I do a search, the folders column is missing, and then I have to add it again. So there is a sense of, I did something, but it doesn't persist. So our motivation is sort of captured by this one quote from another one of our participants in fieldwork. When we ask them to sort of give us a tour through all their information related to a project they selected. And then one of the questions we ask is, give us your ideal tool. So here it is, something that puts all the stuff in one place instead of having all these different places for, all the electronic stuff, I use Delicious for web references. I use my mail app for email. I use Things for the project. I use some of the project, but sort of task coordination, sort of organization. And so everything is in its own little place. And it might be nice if there was some place to have it all in one place. So I think that is a reasonable thing, a reasonable goal. So that's our motivation for the planner. And a little bit more on that. Suppose that effective organization of information could just happen. That you didn't have to think about, now I'm going to organize the stuff, but as a natural outgrowth of things that you do already, like planning. Your information is organized. So, but how do people plan? Well, they plan all over the place. People plan while they don't use Microsoft Project to plan, okay? They plan while they're driving, while they're walking, talking, notes scribbled on a piece of paper. those are the ways that people plan. So the planner is basically a document-like overlay to the file system. And with the planner, the file system can also be used to organize other forms of information besides documents and files. It can also organize email messages and web pages. And so let's see if I can get to this demo.
When I start a big project like our home remodel, I first try to write my ideas down. What's the budget going to be like? Which rooms will we change? I just write thoughts down freestyle as these come to me. I used to use paper, then I used a word processor. Now I use the planner. As I get my thoughts together, the planner helps me to bring together all kinds of information that I'll need to make decisions and to finish the tasks. Photos, drawings, spreadsheets, pointers to email messages, blogs, and conventional web pages too. Notes, due dates, and meeting times. Everything comes together in ways that work for me. Most important, organization happens without asking me to trust in some application-specific database or some nebulous cloud up on the web. Instead, organization is done using folders, files, and shortcuts of my good old boring file system. The planner provides document-like views of my file system, and much more. As I type and edit, just as I would in any document, I'm also annotating, linking, and grouping in the file system. Even as I think and plan, I'm also organizing. How does this happen? Let's go back to my planning for the home remodel. After 4 weeks, the planning document that started out small has gotten a lot bigger. Just as I might do in a word processor, I can switch in the planner to an outline mode for better control over which parts of the plan I see and how these parts are structured. Now it's time to make some decisions about sound systems for the house. First, I'll pull together some good information I've found from several websites. I do this using a planner feature called Drag and Link. As I drag a few key sentences from each website into the plan, links are automatically created that I can later click to get back to the source. Of course, I can drag and link from other kinds of information too. For example, from a Word document about healthy homes that my architect sent me, or an email from a contractor about schedules. I can also add my own notes anywhere in a plan. Using the planner for a project, sometimes I start out by just dragging and linking and typing in a lot of notes as a kind of brainstorm. Then later I start to organize links and notes under various headings and subheadings as I start to understand the project better. And I don't need to leave the planner to get work done. For example, I can create a document or an email message from right inside the home remodel plan. In this case, I sent an email to our contractor, Joe, about granite countertops. Of course, the email itself is kept in storage managed by my email application. But by creating the email message from within my remodel plan, I have a link to the message in the context of remodel tasks. What's especially nice about this in-context creation is that I can easily go back to a document or email message later while I'm thinking about the related remodel task. Here I can check to see if Joe has responded to my email message yet. Now what's really interesting about the planner is that it's basically just another view into my file folder organization. As I add a new heading to my plan, for example, for something like Decide on Faucets, this is just another way of adding a folder. Essentially, the planner lets me use my file folders to organize not only files, but also other kinds of information that I need for the project, such as email messages and web pages. And in the planner, I can also order headings and subheadings however I like. Also, using the planner, folders can stand for tasks that need to be completed. For example, Decide on Countertops is both a folder holding countertop information and a task that needs to be completed by a certain date. The planner includes an option to set calendar reminders which then appear in my digital calendar. And I can export any planning view, link structure and all, as an HTML document. For projects that I'm working on, I often do this as a first step towards creation of a document that I want to share with others. The document might be a blog or a conventional status report for work. For the home remodel, I'm using these HTML documents to maintain a special home remodel website where friends and family can go to see how things are going. To summarize, there are two key things about the planner that I especially like. First, I don't need to place all my trust in some special database with its own special demands for maintenance and organization. The planner is just a document-like overlay to my file system. Second, I stay focused on my project, its planning, and the tasks that need to be done. The planner organizes my information along the way.
How come when you were sending a document to your folder hierarchy, it didn't predict which folder it needed to go into based on the hierarchy in the planner? You still had to go in and choose the folder.
I don't remember that. I can show you in real life how it works. Here's what I was doing today for the talk.
Uh-huh.
And here is the talk. And there it is. We have, so basically if I create a document here, the in-context create would be, well, I don't have internet connectivity, so I can't send you an email right now, but I can get out old emails, but I can also create a document, for example, notes from the talk. To make this a Word document, you can also make it a new thing we have is that it can also be a OneNote section. And so let's see, although...
So in this case, it's food for talk. Itself a folder, food for talk in Microsoft.
Yes. No, it's not a folder. Well, that's a document there. I created a, I have this naming convention for me that whenever I'm doing anything, like when I'm writing a paper or a presentation, I have food for thought, food for the presentation. So it's just notes that I take to myself. And,
so the folder in this case is the root presentation note or whatever.
Oh, I should explain that. So basically, what you saw, that Microsoft presentation for Microsoft, that was that looked like a heading, and it's actually also a folder. So our vision of this would be, if we had the right hooks, we wanted to just sort of hook into Windows Explorer, but they don't have the right interfaces for us to do that. So I mean, there are things like iShell view and iShell folder, but they basically let you sort of create your very own namespace and plug it in there. You can't provide other modes of interacting. So here it is, notes for today. And any questions? We can add the questions here. I can get back to you on that. I don't know. Anyway, so but to get back to your, I don't know. I'm not sure.
Now it will know the folder.
It happens instantaneously. I mean, it happens right away. So,
Right.
so for example, here's the. I'll get out of this.
So if you do a save as right now to this document,
Huh?
if you do a save as to this document right now, will it know exactly where it lives in the folder structure?
It should. I haven't ever tried this, and but in this case, it doesn't. But I don't know why that is.
Yeah.
You know that
I
that
figured
seems.
that's what you meant for it to do.
Yeah, but I can. Yeah, let's go back to Word, for example. I had a Word thing, food for thought. So it's if we go down here. Well, you know what? I need to.
I didn't mean to sidetrack you.
No, that's okay.
figured
I just realized that I didn't ever actually plug in my my power, so I'm getting low on power. But let me just, before we do that, so let's see. We have the folder view of this. Here's the Microsoft Talk. I don't have any. I have food for talk up here, and that is this file. And now, if I want to, this is a pretty flat structure, but one thing that's kind of nice about the document model. Well, one thing that's nice about it is I have the ability to do something we call in-place expansion. I can make a folder shortcut to something else, and anywhere. That's not local. This is the MIT talk that I did recently, that I based this talk on, and so I can do a in-place expansion and basically see the contents of that folder here. So I think that's pretty nice. It's very handy. Let me just, so that I don't get these battery messages. I thought I'd already done that, but in the midst of everything else, I forgot to. So anyway, and I can make another folder. Making a folder is as simple as just basically just hitting return. So aftermath. I'll just say aftermath. Okay, so that's a folder. Okay, and I can make notes in here, or I can have a little questions that I can make a document in here. So I'll make a Word document this time. I could send an email message too if we had connectivity, which I don't. So there's questions. Why did you do this? Whatever. And there's some other interesting things that I'll show you just while we still have time. But let me just first of all demonstrate that this is actually a folder under now Microsoft Talk has Aftermath. And under Aftermath is questions. Questions I get back to this way. And I also get back to it this way. It's the same thing. Okay. So I wanted to show you one thing that I think is especially interesting about our newest release. By the way, this is available up on the web. If you search for Keeping Found Things Found on the web, you'll find our site as one of the first choices up there. And if you go to, what is it, Planner Prototype, or what's the tab? 7.2. No, just 7.1. We're not, yeah. You can download it for free. And just a small registration. So one thing I'll just show you, I use the planner all the time. I use it every day. And so I have, for example, I have a mini book that I'm working on, even as I'm working on the talk today. And like all of us, I switch back and forth between different projects all the time. So I'll have food for the mini book that I'm writing. So now I'm working on that. And then later I'll probably go back to the Microsoft talk. In a typical day, I might say, "Oh yeah, that was a good thought," or maybe I'll decide to, maybe I'll have a little block of time to work on it. And so I'm back, back at food for the Microsoft talk. Okay. So what we allow you to do is two things. One thing is if I'm here, I can also go and push something else in there. I can push I can push an email message in here. For example, let's pretend. I hate to show my personal email, but I could. This is our. I found out that one of our releases didn't support ICC temporarily, so I could push this in there, for example, and I hope this will work. So that's just with a hotkey combination. I can make a connection back to. Well, there it is. So now I've just sort of pushed stuff out there. So that the model there is that I've got a lot of web pages or email messages. I just want to push it into the project. Okay, and voila, I can go back to the project. I say voila, there it is. Okay, so that's one thing. And then in the other direction, I may be on an object that I've been working on in the context of a project, and want to get back to that quickly. So here I'm back. I'm thinking of my thoughts are now back to the lecture again. I want to go back to that quickly. There I am. I'm back there at Morgan Claypool, and I'm back basically back to the note that references that item. And two-click access means that I can also click on everything else around here. So I can click on other things related to this project as well. So here's an email message that I thought was related to the project. And there it is. Okay. So two-click access. One click from an information item, that a document or a web page or an email message that I've already related to a project. I click to jump back to the planner, and then I click again to go out to other things that are related. And related how? Well, they're nearby. That's a sense of place. They're nearby. Okay. So so another example here would be, now I'm back at the Microsoft talk again. Well, actually, that's food for the MIT talk. I wonder what happens if I do that. Nothing, because it's not open. Anyway, so let's go back to the Microsoft talk. I think I'm not pressing. Oh, I'm not pressing the right buttons. That's what's wrong. Here I am at the Microsoft. Now I want to go back to the project for Microsoft. There I am. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I was not pressing the right. I was pressing Control O instead of Windows O to get back to it.
Do you have a way of relating a single item into multiple projects?
Yeah, that can be done. Now, right now, because we're sort of a limited resource team, we only have three developers working on it part-time, including Eric, who's in the back of the room. We say, you go back to the thing you last, was most recently exposed.
Right.
Okay. So if a note, if we have, these are notes, we call them notes. These lines, and you know, as you saw in the video, you can also switch over to a draft view as well. Eventually, we'll support other views, I suppose. But these are notes, and so you have notes, and I can type in, you know, I have food for talk at Microsoft, but I could also say ideas for talk. You know, I could just, it's just text editing, and in the same way, I can create folders just by text. I don't have to do a right-click, new folder, folder name. I can just simply type in. You know, I can just simply type in the next project, whatever, and it's
it creates a new folder, and then you can create documents under that.
That's right. Yeah.
Can that work in reverse? Can you drag items into the folders that have been created and have that reappear in your planner document?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We have synchronization with the file system.
Okay.
Yeah, we do have that, and so yeah, I can show that to you if you like. But we do have that. Yeah.
Could you speak for a moment about the flag icons that I see?
Yeah, you bet. So let's take the Microsoft Talk today. We have, you click on that and you flag as a task to do, okay? And we'll say a start date. I think that's a little bit late to be starting on it since the talk is today. Well, this is the 11th, isn't it? I thought it was the 9th. Okay, it's definitely due today. I'll just forget about start. And I can add a heading shortcut to today. Today is a special kind of project. Probably that has to wait for another time, but I can add that as a heading shortcut to today. And I can also add calendar reminder in Outlook. I can also add a task in Outlook, but what we find when we talk to people is a lot of people don't use tasks. They just informally, if they want something done, they just create an appointment. So I'm just going to leave it at this. And there we go. There's a flag, and if I look under today, there's the Microsoft Talk. It's basically, and I can do in-place expansion if I want to see it there. Okay. I really like the ability to collapse, though, to collapse all that detail. Oh, I'm at a convocation this afternoon. You can see that I'm actually using this. I'm not just. So here's the information about the graduation gown that you know, or whatever, the regalia they call it for the convocation. You know. I got my doctorate from Carnegie Mellon, so I have the tartan colors. And this is important information on where to take it back so they don't charge you $1,000. So that's the, and I'll show you the calendar. It should also be in the calendar. And there it is, Microsoft Talk. It's an all-day event. But don't worry, this talk will end in just a few minutes. All right. So I wanted to go back to the presentation. Any other questions or anything else you want me to try out with the planner while you've got it there? Oh, obviously, what I can do is also flag this as complete, and that would be in removing the shortcut heading from today, and it adds a note to the journal that I've completed this task.
Is there a reason some of these are links and shortcuts, and some of these tend to be files? I think it's kind of related to the question you asked earlier. Because if I have multiple files that are being used across, they get copied, replicated, moved.
Well, I thought Hebrew, yeah, so there's, I thought you were more saying in the case where I'm vectoring back, where do I vector in the case of ambiguity if it's referenced multiple places? Or maybe that's not. Yeah. What we do is we basically go back to the place that was last exposed. So you can have several different notes pointing to the same file, for example, or the same email message or the same web page. And we'll go back to the one that you most recently exposed. So that's one thing. Now, as far as linking versus having the file right there, what we're doing in the case of, I mean, there are different models of this. If you go to the web, then maybe nothing is local, okay? But as long as you're on the desktop, things are local. You have to decide where a file is going to go. And so we have, so if you're creating a file, that goes by default in the folder that is corresponding to the heading under which you created. I wanted to show you one thing. It was maybe not obvious in the video, but I think it's incredibly useful. We have the problem, anybody who uses Outlook knows that there's a real problem with knowing what to do with attachments. Where are they? And where is their place? I've had people, I know that somebody I know sent a personal email to Steve Sinofsky about it, and he said, I know, it's a problem. That you can be working on something and it's in a temporary location, and then you're totally divorced from that later, and it says, do you want to save this? Oh, no, I don't want to save it. And he lost several hours of work because he was working in it and he hadn't properly closed it. So we're not used to that, this notion of temporary folders. So what we do is, let me go back to the Microsoft talk again. There it is. So what we do is, suppose this is this actually is the talk. I emailed it to myself. So as an attachment, and it detaches the attachment, and it makes a file locally. So I can work with it. And I can also do things like, I can do new version, so copy, do corrections or whatever. Okay, there we go. And I can even email it back again to myself as a response. So that sort of supports a dialogue. Obviously, I'm not going to be having it with myself, but with collaborators on an article. I might be emailing it back and forth. I know that we're almost out of time now, so, well, you know what? I'll just go back to the talk. There it is. I use the planner to get back to the talk in progress. Okay, so, or the slides. So this is that kind of the visualization of it, everything in one place. Objectives, write down project-related thoughts just as easily as you would write a document. And so less cost, more benefit. Get more out of it than it's not just a static document, it's a basis for organizing all the information you need to get it done, okay? Two design principles, no new organization. And I would say, one thing people ask is, well, what about OneNote? Well, OneNote is very, very useful and people love it, but essentially OneNote is its own organization. It only interfaces with the file system at the level of section groups and corresponding to folders. Organize incidentally. Project-related information is organized as a byproduct of a plan's elaboration. With no organization, by the way, I wanted to just mention one thing. In some of our field work, we've talked to people who have used like a well-intentioned PIM tool, like InfoSelect is one of them, used it for a year in one case. And what they realized over time is, and they were very enthusiastic about it at the outset, and they tried to organize everything that way, but the problem is it had its own special database. And so what they found is that the database wasn't doing everything for them that the file system did. And so they were still going back, and so they were basically doing duplicates of documents, file system and this special purpose database. And that, over time, they realized, after a year, they realized that it was not making things more simple, it was complicating things. One thing as an aside here is I think that one of the sort of unheralded maybe crown jewels of Microsoft is the file system that people have entrusted so much of their data to. And yet, what has been done? I mean, I don't know, WinFS, is that coming back? You guys tell me. When I was here, it was Cairo, and they were all meant to sort of radically re-engineer the file system. But if I look at the file system, it still looks very much like what I might have seen 20 years ago. So here's a wrap-up of some of the features. We have ordering, grouping, annotation, drag and link. I didn't really show you that, but I think you get the idea. You can take an object outside an item, we call it, and bring it in, and there's a link back. Or you can just grab text, like from an email message, a summary of, okay, we're meeting at such and such a place for dinner. That's the outcome at such and such a time. But by dragging it in, you also have source. So you can still go back and say, why did we decide on that place? And why that time? Couldn't people meet a little bit later than that? And so then you've got the source to understand that. In context create, the idea is that as you're just working along, you can just create items or create a marker for items to do later. I've shown you several different kinds of information integration. There's different forms of information. That's one of the key things. Web pages, email messages, documents, integration of planning and organizing, so that as you're making headings and subheadings representing projects and tasks, you're also creating folders. And then there's also integration with the file system. And then that little flag was about integration of task management. Some earlier evaluations were pretty positive. But I will be honest with you, the earlier evaluations were very much with sort of a limited use guided demo, hands-on demo. And so now we're at the stage where it's robust enough for people to use on a daily basis. And so we're starting a study now that'll last for several weeks where people will actually use it on a project in their life and see how it works for them. And I'm interested in comparing that with another project, that their ongoing project in their life. We're basically going to say, just do that other project the way you would normally do it. And then what we're after is qualitative information, qualitative comparisons, really. And some of the ones that are most noteworthy, we're going to drill down on them. And so I presented at CHI 2008 on this, and that was promised and done. We did file synchronization. That gets back to the question you asked about what happens if you do something behind the planner's back in the file system. It does file synchronization. And the file system always wins. So just to be clear about that. And then we did remind by and do by connections. Also, we have life organizers that I won't have time to talk about today. 2-click access, I showed you, in-place expansion, and a number of other features. OneNote integration, several different kinds of navigation, kind of combining the document world with the web page world. Next steps, I mentioned the multi-week evaluation. Part of that is also to do reference tasks to sort of test their ability to get back to information later. We've been doing that all along. We have had a keeping task and a refining task. And then on to the web. Eric and I and others in the team have been in a discussion. One problem with the desktop version is that people don't want another desktop application. And they're not going to install things on their desktop anymore. But if you say it's just a plugin, well, that's okay. Okay. Or that's what we're betting on. I don't know. That may become as saturated as the desktop is now. But what we want to do is see what can happen if we move to the desktop. And then we also want to support palm tops. There are the ideas. Have an interface that allows you to integrate with a mechanism of continuous logging through the day. I was really struck at the CHI conference when we did the lab tours. It was actually the Microsoft presentation, but it could have been any of them. I saw people raising their hands during the presentation, but they had their iPhone or some other device. They were raising their hands to get a better view of the slide, so they could take a picture. And so there's sort of this notion that throughout your day you could be logging what you're doing, and we want to work on that. And then group work is another thing we really want to be able to support with the planner. So that's I should definitely say that there are obviously related efforts. I think the group bar is a related effort in the sense of being able to place things. The physical act, physical as mediated by your tools, obviously moving things and having control over where it is. I put Umia because a question mark because it's tagging, so I'm not so sure that's about placing things. And more recently, Voida in a session I chaired it, I chaired it at CHI, on I don't know how you pronounce that, Geonata or something, and it's basically a desktop way of bringing together everything related to what they call an activity. And then, of course, OneNote. So I think things that are unique to the planner, relatively unique, maybe unique, in context creation. As you're typing along, you can create something in context. It's an overlay of, that should be overlay of the file system. It has a pervasive outline overlay, one continuous view. And then I think overall design goals also drive the planner in a different direction than other tools. It's not about taking notes, for example. It's about this sort of radical integration based on this idea of document-like customizability. So one of the things that I think is very powerful here is that everything is in one view, and all my projects, everything I'm trying to do right now is sort of accessible. I can go up here and do it. I can jump back and forth between these different tabs, but essentially I have a sense of direction. I know that this is up and this is down. And if I want to say, now that the talk is almost done, I'm going to move this up so that gets more of my attention, I can do that easily enough. Simple ordering, okay? And yeah.
Does that ever go away?
Like if it's out of sight, out of mind, you're done your talk here and you want to...
Well, that's a very good question, right? One of the problems we have, actually, this is perfect for this. What are the factors affecting success or failure of this or any tool like this? In another study, we sort of extracted a few things that matter. In the near term, visibility and the ability to integrate with what you've already got. If you don't see it, if you don't see the tool, you're probably not going to use it. And then longer term, there's return on investment. You can be tagging, you can be very enthused about it, and then over time realize it's just not really giving me what I want, even though the enthusiasm will carry you along for quite a while, maybe a year. And then scalability, and that is what about clutter? And we don't have an answer to that yet, to be honest. And the problem is that you don't want to, yes, there is a problem that, I mean, the good news is, well, here's what I'm doing on evaluation of the planner. I can just type in stuff anytime I want to. A note to myself to do something. And I'll do that all the time. I'll just sort of say, oh, yeah, I need to get in touch with the participants to schedule, okay? It doesn't have to be understandable. But the problem is those notes don't go away unless I manage them. And that becomes a real pain. So we're thinking about ways of sort of automatically one thought we're thinking of is that things can sort of fall below a fold, that new things can sort of push old things farther down. My background is in human memory research at Carnegie Mellon a long, long time ago, and that sort of kind of has connections to the way human memory works. It's not like old things go away, they just sort of get pushed down with respect to accessibility. Okay, so well, how much time? We had an hour and a half, I guess, but you were saying people usually leave after. Yeah, anyway, these are the questions for you to think about. What places do you create? What support would you like to see? And what would it take for you to use a planner or some other new and promising tool, quote. And here's the connections. Feel free to contact me if you'd like. And thank you. So I'm happy to stay around with anybody who wants to continue discussing this. But I think, and you're still here, so I'm going to keep on talking, but I won't be offended if you leave, okay? So we are sort of back to these discussion questions. What places do you create in your life? And what support would you like to see that's not there now?
Where do visual things live in have a picture or... Because the websites are a good example because maybe I type a note about something, but then all those little web links look exactly the same.
Right. We don't support that now. Our answer is if you really want pictures, create a OneNote section in the planner and put it in there. We just don't have the bandwidth to do that. But it also raises some issues around, I think text can sometimes be your friend. Visuals, pictures can take up a lot of space. And so, when I see some demos, for example, of the tabletop interface that Microsoft has presented some, I see, whoa, that's a lot of clutter, and I don't really know, all of those things don't necessarily cohere in a way. So I don't think text is necessarily bad. It's as a sort of an entry point to the information. So those are the two answers. Is one is we just don't have the resources now. Over the long run, we'd like to support, if you look at Word, for example, it has a draft view, an outline view, and a print layout view. The print layout view would be the one where pictures are presented, okay? And but then the longer answer, or the more controversial answer is, well, maybe that's not such a good thing to have in every view. And so maybe you just want a text view. Yeah?
I was going to say that the single thing that I really wanted was these multiple views. Not just for that, but for keeping things that I've done gone, but not completely gone. Out of sight, but not out of mind. If I need to say, oh, what did I get done this week? I want to be able to flip a little filter and say, yeah. And I don't want to do it with a lot of heavyweight machinery. I know there's that trade-off of this barrier for complexity. That was, I used a tool called Echo for a while that I'm sure you know about.
And what was your experience with that?
For the first year or so, I loved it, and yet it was one of these things where Outlook came out and it wasn't integrated with Outlook, and then it was bought, and essentially it went the way of history. But I still actually occasionally use it. I can still use it when I need to make that list of what I need to do. And I keep on trying to use OneNote over and over and over again, and all of these things take a real discipline.
Yeah.
You need to keep to.
Well, that's a good point. It's not just about the tool, it's also about an associated methodology for using it, or a discipline.
There were things about that echo that I think I have not seen. I tried to duplicate.
What were some? I'm just curious. What?
One of the things was you had multiple columns. You could add another column, and in those other columns you could put any data. And you could sort by any of those columns. You could filter by these columns, and it was a very lightweight, generalized thing. So I could essentially have a to-do list, and when I was done, I could hide the thing. But then I had another view that says, "What did you get done? Just show me done." So I kept it in a nice outline hierarchy, and that was very nice. Or I can say, who was I doing it with? I can find all the things I was working with Curtis on.
One thing you might be interested in, it's on the Mac, but it's on the outline.
Yes.
You know about that, yeah.
Word,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because they sort of try to combine columns with outline. Yeah. Anyway, you had your.
I used to use something called In Control. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
No, In Control.
In Control was really, I thought,
what a great name.
that were like Echo, but I found it to be a lot better. And it was also multi-column hierarchical. One thing that was interesting was you could assign sort of color or font sizes based on the hierarchy.
Okay.
And you could override them if you wanted to too. And that helped you sort of call attention to certain things that were sort of important to you. You could have in other columns pointers to a lot of other things. So with that, we could sort of accomplish a lot of these things, sort of pointers to documents and other places without having to have it all in the document. You could sort of filter and sort. It knew when you put things in, so that you could automatically age stuff, so everything would be on a certain date, archived into a separate file. It had quite a lot of functionality. I think I really like what you're doing here, given the limits of the file system.
Yeah. So. One question is, what are we all going onto the web? Is the file system as something we directly interact with going away? Obviously there's a file system underneath all those web services on the web, but it's not something we work with in any direct sort of way. What do you guys think about that?
At a convolution, how much do you use it?
Pardon me?
How much do you use the file system after using the planner?
Well, I used to use this file system a lot, and so one of the things I'll say there is that in our own research we sort of find, and not just ours, but other people like Boardman and Sasa find that to the extent that you invest in an organization, a digital organization, it's going to be the file system, and that is more true now than it was a few years ago. I think that like if you look at what people are doing in Outlook, for example, folders, that people used to. I've talked to several. I don't have like significant data on this, but my sense is that I've talked to many people who said, well, I used to use folders in Outlook, but I get so much email anymore, I just don't have the time to, even the mechanics of dragging it and dropping it into the folder or setting up a filter and maintaining it is just too much. So it's just in the file, it's just in the inbox. And anyway, so that's my sort of aside that's another reason we picked the file system. And of those hierarchical stores, it's the one that has the richest set of representation. How often do I use it? I use it all the time instead of the file system. I used to use the file system a lot, and now I use the planner almost all the time. Except that there are still a few things that I need to do in the file system, and when I want to do that, the planner has a feature for that. Oops. I don't know what I just did, but you can go up here and I can just do an explore, and there it is. I'm right up. So then the things that I can't do, there's some things that I just can't do. Anyways, somebody else had their. I think you were next. Yeah.
Is there a difference in the way people organize their information, like on paper and notebooks and on computers? Because I find myself using them vastly differently in terms of recognition and being able to find the information.
Really? So say more about that. How do you use them vastly differently?
Because paper is just a big jumble of stuff that sits on my desk, and I can still find it very easily because of the visual association that I don't think about, so I don't really know.
Okay.
On a computer, it's incredibly hard to find information. Even if I put it in things like the OneNote, where I've taken the conscious effort to put it in a certain place.
You still find it difficult to get back to it again later.
The desktop is 2D and your desk is 3D, right? You got like layers and these things.
So I think you also have all that texture, right? Like
Yeah.
you know that like, oh, this is a photo, so it's not going to look like a piece of paper, which whereas on this, the file system, your list looks the same regardless of what it is. And you have a little icon to cue you in, but you don't have anything to really guide you.
10,000 documents in this.
Right, you're saying.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, related to that point, have you done much research on more dimensional contextual memory? Because, you know, you're a brain guy too, you know, the part of the brain that recognizes what something is stored in a different part of the frontal lobe than where something is. And I was thinking as you have more different kinds of sensory feedback, that helps form this fabric of the context of where you're storing stuff. And I think that's especially true in the physical world. And if you did more of those other kinds of things in the digital world, maybe you can enhance the retention.
I think that's a good point, and that relates to this general notion of incidental memory. That things just get the traces get laid in the course of your doing things without you doing anything explicit. And so, Mary, what do you know about that? I think there is some work that has been done on whether if you sort of assign files a color, for example, or an icon, are people more likely to sort of happen to remember it later by that, even if they didn't make the assignment.
Yeah, there's been a lot of studies on, using cues and landmarks and snippets of windows to help you remember what it is as opposed to a thumbnail and things like that.
Yeah, but I mean, one thought here is that if you just, one thought is, of course, you could select an icon and you could select a color and other things. But most of us wouldn't take the trouble to do that. So the question is, if that were sort of there gratuitously, would you attend to it, and would that? And my guess is yes, it probably would be grist for the mill later when you're trying to get. I mean, it would if the system could use it, you would probably. It might very well lodge in your mind. I don't remember, but it was sort of it was about this big. It was this color and it had this shape to it. You know, those are things that. Yeah.
That versus text versus audio.
Yeah, very powerful.
We're so visual.
Yeah. I think it's. For me, I'll tell you one thing that I didn't expect. I do use a planner all the time, and one thing I do it for is just window management, and I never would have expected that. But I manage it when I am guilty of having lots of windows open, and so I manage it just as a way to get back to a particular window, that even when the stuff is already open. Because I don't want to go through Now, I'm waiting for 7. They're going to install 7 on our computers in the iSchool, and I'm waiting to try out that group bar-like ability to move things around. That may change things, but yeah. Any other comments or thoughts on? Yeah.
Just sort of the side question. I was curious on how you organize the development of this project. Is this sort of like CodePlex or open source, or through the university, students doing the development, or? Yeah,
we do. Eric, you could say a little bit more about that, maybe, or not to put you on the spot.
We're 3 developers in our team, and we're doing this more like the agile way, but it's a mixture. We just develop this, try to express our methodology and ideas. And since we're moving to the web, we're not sure whether it's an open source API or not, but we're moving that way actually. We hope everybody can use our.
Not yet. It takes a commitment of resources to really make it properly open source, and so we're not quite there yet. But it is our intention to do that. And we have things like we use Track for bug tracking. We don't use Bugzilla, but we use Track. And we have one of our team that's really a proponent of agile development, so he wants us to move in that direction. Yeah.
Are you keeping any metadata about the line items in the planner or not, or the ability to manipulate that metadata? The reason why I was saying that is that one of the things I liked in the application I was using is that you could explicitly put dates in, or it would know implicitly when you put things in.
Oh.
Specifically, if I was doing, like, say, the home remodel, I was putting in dates. A lot of times you can't sort of visualize date items, and what you could do is you could filter within dates, you could cluster stuff, and then blow it out into a calendar or into a timeline to sort of get a spatial sense of all these tasks that you have?
That's a very good, very timely question for us because we are doing that. We're logging information, and the intent is not that it is. I mean, it's a potential benefit to us as we're monitoring what people are doing, but the intention is that ultimately it's a benefit to the user too. It gets back to this. It gets back to this question: if you can build it, will you come back consistently, over time, repeatedly? I can say that for me, I do, but then I don't count. So we also have the example. I will say honestly that some people, it's taken a while before they use it. I think Eric uses it now much more than when he initially started with the project, and I don't think it was just because I was haranguing you to use it. It takes. But anyway, what we have now is this. We have events in the planner, and they have associated times, and a location in the planner, like they're basically folders, UNC paths. And so we have the ability to later on to go back already and say, how much time did I spend yesterday on the Microsoft talk? We have that ability. Well, what we do is export it as tab separated values that can be read into Excel to do the processing right now. But that's a big direction to go in. It's a big direction to go in. Once you have a comprehensive log, you can use it in all sorts of different ways. And so that's the direction we're going in.
But the beauty of it is you already know what the tasks are because they're organized that way.
Well, that's it. I mean, so it's not, and again, it goes back to this notion of implicit tagging, that I don't have any conscious thought of tagging my event of opening this Ideas for Microsoft with Microsoft Talk. But it's there. Obviously, it's there redundantly here because I've used it in the title. But it's also there implicitly because I accessed it from here. And so that's effectively a kind of tagging. The other thing you saw in the demo is I can also, this gets back to something in the same line as the status tracker that I can open this if I want to. I can just focus on and bring it into its own window, and then from there I can save as an HTML document, for example, and then I can read that into. So I can save it, brings it up as right now it's bringing it up as a web page, but I could also obviously read it into Word. And if I do read it into Word, the structure is preserved. So whatever I had is preserved as headings and subheadings in Word. So that means that I'm well on my way to writing a project report. Now, I'll clean up all this mess, of course. But each of those things is a reminder of me in some ways of something that I did that I might otherwise have forgotten about. Any other questions or comments? Or yeah. You.
Yeah.
Oh.
I was just.
No. If anybody, please contact me if you have any. If you want to use it, or you look like you're interested. I'd love to hear your feedback on it later. Okay.
This is all about planning, right? Like the thing that bothers me the most is most of the things we do nowadays tend to be unplanned.
Yeah.
Right? There's too much of stimulus that comes into our life.
Right.
So I just wonder what sort of an information organization metaphor you need to kind of handle this constant. It's like email, right? Like you just mentioned in email, like folders are kind of unusable at this point, and almost everything else we're starting to do. Like for example,
it's all
blogs and everything are just stream based, right? It's like
it's interrupt based, and this gets back to also work that Mary and her team have done on the constant task interruptions, and your evidence suggests people even do self-interruption.
Self-stimming, that's what we call it. Self-stimulation.
No, I found myself doing it when I was working on the talk earlier today. I was adding some slides, and I just went to email just for a diversion, or these days I might go to Twitter or Facebook just as for the diversion. So I think that. Yes, and that's the direction. That's why we're really into this idea of logging as an ongoing activity. But we don't think that planning goes away. But planning is, you could sort of say that you have your stand-up moments during the day when when you have your your iPhone or your BlackBerry or your Windows whatever, and you're that's during the day. That's stand up, and then you have sit down, which is more amenable to planning at the end or the beginning of a day. So I think they're both.
Let ourselves wander so much.
Optimistic.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know if I made that clear with one thing about plans is that you can sort of say, I'm sending an email message in the context of this plan, and again, because I don't have connectivity, I can't actually do it now. But here's I'm sending that email message, and yeah, I want to know what the responses are to that, but only when I'm back in this context. And so I get to decide when I'm going to attend to that. Okay, and that's an important thing. You choose. You can. I think the planning, as supported by something like this, enables you to be a lot less reactive and much more proactive about what you're doing.
Yeah, maybe some form of indication in the planning area, each of the areas, saying, what's the most current activity.
Yeah, that would be very interesting. Yeah, well, that's something we do have this thing called Today that's a little bit like that, but it's very crude at this point. But yeah, so I mean, and sort of an inspiration for that, by the way, was Outlook. But I bet, even in this room, I bet a lot of you don't know about this feature. How many people know about this sort of day at a glance feature in Outlook?
I do, but I don't use it.
Well, this is the one I'm talking about. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Let's thank William again for his great discussion.
Okay. Thank you. I really appreciated the comments and questions.